Thanks, Michelle, for coordinating this. And I know this is a huge effort to coordinate this lecture series, and it's really important to have this platform throughout the year. So just a huge thank you to Michelle and everybody else who's made this possible. And then, of course, to Bhakti and her team who did it before this. My name is Sean Kivlahan. For maybe I don't know, I am based in Boston at Brigham and Women's. I'm the Fellowship Director for Global Emergency Medicine here. And I'm going to go through a really high level structural talk on what is global emergency medicine from the perspective of if you are an ER doctor who is either thinking about getting involved in the field, currently involved in the field, or just have questions of how to expand your current involvement, going through all the different resources that are out there and really what is the landscape of global emergency medicine, because it is a little distinct from global health if you look at that, and a little distinct from humanitarianism. Global EM is kind of its own niche that has overlap into both of those areas. But hopefully this will be useful to people coming from the perspective of ER doctors in ways you can get involved. And some of this, for everybody will be involved in some of these things, but I'm sure nobody's involved in all of them. So hopefully whatever parts, some parts will be new to you, and feel free to share this. This is meant as a resource document for people. And please add any suggestions by email. I've given this talk before, and each time people email me say, "Oh, what about this organization?" And then I add them in. It's if something's left out, it's not because I don't think they're good. It's just because I wasn't aware of them or didn't think of them. So don't take it personally. Just email me and I'll edit it in next time. All right. So with that, all right, let's start. Since I figure we should start with GEMA and GEMFC, since this series is organized by GEMA and GEMFC, that's a good place to start. So Global EM Fellowship Consortium. This is critically important if you are thinking about applying to fellowship in global emergency medicine. You definitely need to know about this. And if you are currently a fellow, you probably already know about this. So I apologize. The consortium, or now GEMFC committee, the C can stand for either. It was formed a little over 10 years ago by a group of fellowship directors who realized that there was a need for consistency and structure in global EM fellowships, and also a need to align towards a common goal of providing a good experience for fellows and having unified offer dates and letters and applications. So that slowly built ground. It was initially called the International Emergency Medicine Fellowship Consortium, and it changed names into Global. And then in 2022, 2 years ago, it merged into GEMA as a standing committee in GEMA that still has its own infrastructure. This currently, it involves anywhere, every year it varies slightly based on the fellowship numbers, but there's around 35 consistent global EM fellowships in the US and Canada this covers. And this body, it consists of all the fellowship directors, and they meet to coordinate fellowship related issues. This is like creating a common application form, which was just rolled out in the past year. The NRMP match, which we've been doing for about 2 or 3 years now, which in my opinion has been a great success and increased fairness and transparency for both applicants and programs. But all these types of collaborative issues is where this is decided. So really a great service. The website is here. It's all housed by SAEM's website apparatus now. If you're applying to a fellowship, this is where you can find the application forms and you can apply through this website. Also, all fellowships use the NRMP fellowship match now. So you have to register for that separately, but that's just for the match. They don't process applications or anything like that. If you're a fellowship director and you're not involved in this and listening to this, please email SAEM GEMA, GMFC. Tom Becker is the current chair of GMFC, and to get yourself engaged. And then moving on to GEMA, which is GEMFC, is just one of several committees in GEMA. So GEMA, or the Global Emergency Medicine Academy, is one of several academies within SAEM. So there's kind of three big bodies representing emergency medicine in the US, right? There's ACEP, which focuses on is like the official college, focuses on legislative, policy matters, clinical matters, all of that in general for ER doctors in the US. And I'll talk more about ACEP in a minute. And then SAEM, which focuses on academic matters, and then AAM, which we'll talk about in a minute as well. So SAEM has many different academies, one of which is GEMA, focused on global emergency medicine. This was also formed in 2012. And this was a really big deal forming this, because we think that this really established global EM as its own entity and its own pillar in the family of emergency medicine in the US, and recognizing that Global EM is a subspecialty, just like critical care, ultrasound, administration, simulation, all these other things, and global EM is one as well. So this academy is really the academic home of global emergency medicine. There's many standing committees within it. I've listed some of them here: humanitarian, EMS, basic emergency care, decolonizing, the GMFC that I just talked about, coordinates all fellowship affairs are done through GMA. They have an annual business meeting at the SAM conference every year, which I highly recommend going to if you're involved in this. It's probably the single best networking opportunity for people involved in global emergency medicine. I know for me, it is how I've met my network and opened a lot of doors for me. So if you do one thing, I tell people go to the GMA meeting at SAM and also attend the online meetings that happen every other month. You need to be an SAM member. If you're a resident, most residents are SAM members automatically. So signing up for GMA is free if you're already an SAM member. There's also annual grants that are offered, speaking opportunities, a lot of great opportunities. RAMS is the Resident Medical Student Association. They're the resident and medical student body of SAM, and they have their own international subsection if you're a resident or medical student to look into that. And then this is the website for SAM. Again, if you're looking to get involved and you're not quite sure where to start, or you're feeling like you're not where you want to be in your networking for global emergency medicine, or that you're missing out on things, this is the place to start. Join some committees with GMA and you'll get to know people across the country. Everybody's super friendly and they're all looking to do the same thing. So I highly recommend. Next is ASAP. So ASAP is the largest EM organization in the US and focuses on everything, as I mentioned, right? So I kind of think of it sometimes as they focus on the things that I necessarily don't like to think about, right? Like I say, they do the work with the US government, with CMS, to make sure that as ER doctors that we're getting paid, that our patients are advocated for, trying to solve legislative issues related to the boarding crisis and all of these other high level policy things. But within ASAP, there's about 40 or some odd sections, and there is an international section. So this was started in 1998. The website is right here, asap.org/INTL. And this is a really large section. It's actually the largest section at ASAP, interestingly, and it is open to all ER doctors around the world that they can join ASAP at a lower reduced rate. And I should say SAM, you can do the same thing. That's something we advocated for a few years ago, and now they have country-based registration for SAM and ASAP at different fee levels. But this is a great opportunity to meet ER doctors from around the world. There are section meetings that are held online a few times a year, but at ASAP every year, there is an in-person section meeting, which is a good opportunity, again, if you're at ASAP, to meet a lot of other like-minded individuals and also many from outside the US. The international section, it runs a few different things that I'll point out two of them, which I think are really important to know about. The first is the ASAP Ambassador Program. So the Ambassador Program, what ASAP does is they identify ASAP members, ER doctors, who have some sort of relationship with an ER doctor in another country, and they become the ambassador. So think of it just like any ambassador program. These are American ER doctors who are ASAP members who serve as an ambassador of emergency medicine to another country on behalf of ASAP. And then they partner with an ER doctor in that country. So right now there's about 70 countries represented, and it's growing every year. And the big push of this is helping other countries recognize emergency medicine as a specialty, which, as you may know, most countries do not recognize emergency medicine as an independent specialty at this time, and including many countries you may be surprised don't. It's a big effort and it helps advance the specialty and, in my opinion, improve the care for our patients, because I think the way we deliver emergency medicine is very useful to patients and helpful. So I would recommend looking into this. They publish reports every few years that summarize the state of emergency medicine around the world and what countries represent it and contacts. So if you're looking to work in a certain country, this is a great place to start. Look at their website, which I have here, and identify the ambassador for that country if there is one, and just send them a cold email. These are all ER doctors just like you. They're super friendly and responsive. So just shoot them an email and say, hey, I'm working in global EM. I'm interested in this country, et cetera, and see where it takes you. And if you notice that there's not an ambassador for a country and it's somewhere that you work or people that work, then reach out to try to create ambassadorship for that country, because the more connected people are, the better. That's the first thing. The second thing is the Global Village. And this is something that's held at ASAP every year now for the past 2 or 3 years. And it's really gained some traction. And the whole idea is to increase the international draw of the ASAP conference. And what they've done is carved out an area of the exhibit hall where there's 2 full days of continuous programming. And just this, I think it was a week or two ago at ASAP, they had a really good showing. They had people from over 20 different countries that were giving short presentations about what is emergency medicine in their country and what are their challenges, how is it similar or different. And these were led by ER leaders in all these different countries, and in person, small presentations, really great way to get to know people. So next year at ASAP, check this out. And for this and for anything that I'm talking about, this is all led by volunteers. The SAM things are led by SAM members, the ASAP by ASAP members. Honestly, it's all the same people. Many of us do both. So if you're interested in getting involved, everybody's always looking for more help. Just email and we can connect you. The last thing is IFEM, which I'll talk about in a minute, but IFEM, every country has a representative to IFEM, and ASAP is the official US representative to IFEM. So there's a position at IFEM for ASAP, and that's through the International Emergency Section. One last thing about ASAP is just a few years ago, they started the International Committee, which is also really important because this is how things happen at ASAP in the decision making. And there was no International Committee until 2019, which thanks to the advocacy of several people in our group, many of them involved with GMA and other things, were able to advocate to the ASAP board and create the committee. So now gives us a say on international matters in ASAP. So everybody usually knows EMRA. EMRA is the Resident Association of ASAP and quite large. And they have an international division that if you're a resident, definitely get involved in. And you can just take a look at their website. They run a program which I think is really great called the GEMS LP program. And this is a Global Emergency Medicine Student Leadership Program. The link is right there. They take on now, I think this year they'll take on 15 people. And this is meant to provide mentorship to ER residents and medical students that are at or institutions where there's not a lot of global EM mentorship. I said before, there's about 35 or so fellowships, but there's well over 200 residencies, right? So that means the vast majority of residencies don't have a fellowship. And usually some of them may have 1 or 2 faculty working on global EM, but many don't. So this is meant to provide outreach and mentorship to people who may not be able to find that mentorship locally in their own program. There's also different publications. The nuts and bolts of global EM was done by SAM and ASAP. It's pretty outdated now, but it's still a great resource. It's free online. You can download it on the EMRA website for free. And the International EM Guidebook you see here on the right. Also getting a little outdated, but still has great resources. And you can download both of these books for free on the EMRA website. So recommend checking them out. They're really good, clever works. And to be honest, they probably both could benefit from an updating pretty soon. Again, this stuff is all done by volunteers. So if you're interested and motivated, these are probably great tasks to take on. So we covered A7 SAM, also want to cover AAEM. So they have a kind of unique role in emergency medicine, a really powerful advocacy role for the ER doctor and dealing with contract management groups and other things that may not seem as applicable to global EM, but they also have a big push internationally, and they have an international committee. You can see the link here. They run a scholarship program. Every year they run a conference called the Mediterranean Emergency Medicine Conference, which is a great conference to check out and attend. And they run a Spanish language series as well. Also, I should mention that SAEM and ASAP both offer international scholarships as well to their conferences every year. So if you have partners that you're working with in other countries that want to attend SAM or ASAP or AAM conferences, all three have scholarships available that are designed for ER doctors, particularly in lower or middle income countries, so to allow them to attend these conferences. SAM also just rolled out a scholarship for membership for people too. So a lot of great opportunities to get our colleagues involved. Moving on to IFEM. So IFEM is an organization of organizations. We covered the 3 big US organizations now going globally. So IFEM was created in 1989, and there was 4 founding members. So ASAP was one of them, and then also the EM organizations from Canada, the UK, and Australia. They came together and recognizing the need for global advocacy for emergency medicine and formed IFEM. Now it has over 50 members and growing. There's a website right here. This is another incredible resource. So if you're looking for partnership or you're looking to work in a different area of the world, one of the first places I'll go is to the IFEM website and look at this Our Members page. And then when you scroll down, you'll see the links to the ASEP of every country in the world. So every country has their national organization, and you can directly link to their national organization page, point of contact. You can email them, and just, people welcome cold emails. This is how connections are made. So I highly recommend, don't reinvent the wheel. You use these resources. That's what they're designed for. They're designed to facilitate collaboration and networking. And this is accessible to anybody. So they have an annual conference called ISAM, which is a great conference. I would highly recommend it if you're interested in global emergency medicine. This is one to make time for. This year, if you're in North America, it's easy. It's going to be in Montreal. So, and actually right now is the peak time for submissions for various content. So you can check out their website and submit. But that's usually a really good networking conference to be at for this field. There's a ton of committees also in IFEM to get involved. They have committees spanning all different parts of global EM. This is really an incredible way to get involved and build your network globally. The IFEM committees I'm on are truly global, where I'm working, which means you're also doing meetings at 5 a.m. or something, some weird hour, but that's the trade-off. But they're really global, and I'm one of just a handful of Americans on a committee of 30 or 40 people from all over the world. So it's a great resource, where as opposed to ASAP or SAM committees, which by design, they're US centric. So it's a great way to broaden your network. And then there's regional organizations. So there's many of these. I just gave 3 examples here, but there's many more. AFEM is very well known, and their website is here. So AFEM you can think of like an IFEM for Africa. So it's meant to represent emergency medicine across the continent and help different countries within Africa to develop their own national emergency medicine organizations. Just like IFEM, AFEM is not representing any one country. It's an organization of organizations to help collaborate growth in that area. Their website's here. They hold an annual conference, which is in Botswana this year. I think next month is coming up in a few weeks, the AFCAM conference, and another great conference to attend if you're working in Africa or the region to meet and network people. Really excellent conference. Next is USEM, which is the European Society for Emergency Medicine. Same idea as AFEM. It's an organization of organizations representing all the different European countries in developing emergency medicine. They have a conference every year too, called the USEM conference, which is next week, actually, I believe, in Copenhagen. So another great conference to attend. And getting out of the US to these conferences like IFEM, AFEM, USEM, this is a way to really broaden your network far beyond anything that ASAP or SAEM will ever take you. So it truly helps you become global. Similarly, the Asian Society for Emergency Medicine is growing rapidly, representing many of the countries in that region. You can see their website there. And there's many others that I'm not covering for all, but for pretty much every region of the world. There's FLAME in Latin America and many others to look at. All right. Now moving on to a different type of group, CUGH. So CUGH, or the Consortium University of Global Health, this is a little different. This is meant to bring together academic institutions around the world, and it focuses on all of global health. Everything up to this point was really specific to global emergency medicine. This is much broader, and to be honest, I think for many years, global EM was kind of neglected, and EM in general was kind of neglected. But that's changed really over the past few years due to the efforts of several people. And while there's still not quite a global EM committee, there's a lot of effort towards that and increasing the voice of us ER doctors in this larger world of global health, which is really important. This is one of those things that it's important for us as ER doctors to be at this table, because and increasingly we are, because then we can impact the discussions of global health around the world in academics. So recommend checking this out. They have a conference every year too, the CUGH conference. This year is in Atlanta. It was LA last year, is really good, and I highly recommend doing this. This is some of their committees on the right that anybody can join. The way you get membership to CUGH is through your institution. If you're in an academic institution, they're probably a member of CUGH. You join through that. Highly recommend getting involved and giving all of us an EM a voice here. It's a really important platform. All right, moving out of those organizations, now I'm going to go into some of the kind of global health players that you'll interact with and how they're different very quickly. So first is NGOs, non-governmental organizations. So these are common partners for global emergency medicine, doing either humanitarian response or long-term development work, or both. This is just some here on the right, but there's thousands of them, literally. There's national and international ones. There are some that are focused on religious aspects, some are secular, some are advocacy. They all have different focuses. As you can tell by their name, they're independent from governments, and they tend to have a much more local, especially local NGOs, a much more local partnership and stronger roots. So these are common partners, and again, worth reaching out and working with if you're doing global emergency medicine work. NGOs are a little different from the ICRC, who's also a huge player in global health and humanitarian response. So, ICRC was formed in the mid 1800s by Henri Durant, and it's independent. It's not an NGO. It's not a UN organization. They're their own independent organization that that ensures humanitarian protection for people. Mainly, it started in conflict, but has grown from that. Very closely related to the Geneva Conventions, and the first Geneva Convention was written by the same group that formed the ICRC. And now there's related organizations, the IFRC, which is the federation of all the Red Crosses around the world. And these organizations are unique and important partners in global health, and they are involved in a lot of the global health work that we do. And it's important to just understand how they interact with the larger system. So we talk about NGOs, ICRC, and then there's donors. Donors play a key role. They all have their own prerogatives. Nothing nothing in this world is free, right? And nobody gives money for free without an agenda. Even a philanthropic organization or a government, they have agendas like USAID, for example. Their mission is to project soft power around the world in alignment with US government policy. So they also happen to be BHA, Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance, is the largest funder of humanitarian action in the world. So massively influential if you're doing humanitarian work. But remember that donors are always working at the prerogatives of their governments, these donors. Philanthropic donors may have slightly different prerogatives, but they have their own agendas. Their relationships with host governments and national governments can be complex. And it's always important to think of who are you accountable to. And here, accountability for these organizations is to the taxpayers of their governments. That are these funds, these national funds, are all supported by the tax base of the host country. So that's who they're ultimately accountable to, and how it feeds into government policy. Governments themselves are often important partners in global health and humanitarian response. And I say often, but really they should always be the partner. Because nobody should be doing any type of global health or humanitarian work without direct partnership, or at least support and acknowledgement and explicit permission of the host government. This can get complicated in some parts of the world, as we know, where there's conflict or different factions or organizations. But it's important to always identify and work closely with them. And I'll talk about funding at the end, but there's funding relationships here too. The local populations are the most important partners that we work with, and I'm going to talk in a few minutes about how they fit into global health and humanitarian response. So the first responders to any crisis, whether it's a humanitarian disaster, an earthquake, or something like that, or a conflict or a war, or even something small, a car accident, right? The first responder is almost never a healthcare professional or a trained global health professional. The first responder is whoever's there, is the local population who will help, whether they have training or not. So partnering with local populations is a really critical part of our work, and in empowering local populations to be able to be that first responder, a first resort that can provide care as help gets there and gets sorted out. And over the past several years, there's been a really important and relatively new focus on accountability and localization, which I'll talk more about in a minute. Military is somebody that we don't always think about in global health and humanitarian response as a partner, but they are an important partner and actually a very large funder of humanitarian aid. If you look at any large scale crisis, earthquakes, floods, tsunamis, anything like that, by far the largest logistic player is the military, often the US military or another military, and you will be interacting with them. It's important to understand how they fit in and where they fit in with the humanitarian principles, which I'm not going to get too far into humanitarian principles here. It's a bit of a different topic, but it's something you should be aware of when you're interacting with military or state actors. But it's important for us to, as global health responders and humanitarians, to be neutral and independent. There are different ways to interact with the military. That's coordinated by a UN organization called the SIMCORD, and they have a lot of great free resources, both for us, for non-military actors engaging in humanitarian and global health work, and also for military actors engaging in this work. So for both sides, and how they can cooperate or coexist or anything in between, depending on the situation and the context of the environment. But really important component of the global health system to be aware of, both international militaries and host militaries, and also an important funder, which I'll talk about in a minute. Then there's the UN. So, and you see how we've kind of gone from very local SAEM GMA and then all the way up to very international. And now we're at the UN organization. So the UN, it was a very brief history of the UN was formed post World War II era to help prevent another world war and to bring people together to have a common dialogue and try to problem solve. Initially it was 51 members, and now it involves just about every country in the world. There's a lot of different organizations within the UN, many organizations, agencies, funds, programs, dozens of them. They tend to work closely with governments because that is their mandate. The UN itself is supported by its member states. That's where the funding comes from, and that's where the decision making and priorities come from. They have an important role in humanitarian response that was really became defined in the 1990s with a General Assembly resolution that's listed here. And in 1991 was when it formed the Department of Humanitarian Affairs, which was the precursor to what we now know as OCHA, or the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, which was created in 1998. A word about OCHA. So they coordinate or attempt to coordinate all humanitarian aid. This is an impossible job, to say the least, as you can imagine, with the amount of players and the amount of places in the world and challenges and moving targets and new crises every day. But I think given the scope of the challenge, they do a pretty good job at it. They manage several key websites that if you're doing humanitarian work, you need to know about. And that's these websites here on the right. These are all freely available websites that are maintained by the United Nations. They're current, they're reputable, and they're incredible resources. Relief Web in particular, if you're looking for work in the humanitarian sector, this is where the classifieds are basically. So if you're looking for a job and you want to do humanitarian work, go to Relief Web. That's where people post all of their job listings. But then all these other websites is really where everything is placed and all the official communication. So if you're doing humanitarian work, get to know OCHA and work in coordination with them. Related to that is this diagram that if you've probably already seen it, but just in case you've never seen it, if you're doing humanitarian work, it's important to familiarize yourself with the cluster system. And this is all can be found on the OCHA websites as well. And the reason I show this diagram is to show all the different aspects of humanitarian response. We as doctors think of health, which is at the top. But if you look, health is just one small piece of the pie of any humanitarian response, and all these other things that need to go into it. For each of these 11 clusters, there is a lead agency. And depending on your area of interest, this is a good starting point of who to reach out to. So for health, of course, WHO. And I'm going to talk more about WHO in a minute in a little more detail. But all these other organizations, if you're working in shelter or WASH, we education, right? We have food security. We as ER doctors work in all of these sectors and with these different organizations. So this is how you can coordinate. And this is also who you should collaborate with. All of these organizations are routinely issuing RFAs or requests for proposals and for ways for you to work and get involved in different parts of the world. And this is a great starting point when you're looking to expand your reach to become truly global. The humanitarian system, I just want to take a minute to show how all those different players I just talked about in one, for people that are more visual like me, of how they fit together, which, because it can be a little overwhelming, this alphabet soup, which is the whole point of this talk, is going through all these organizations. But the traditional view of the humanitarian system is you have these UN, OCHA, all these agencies at the center. And then up here you have the INGOs, local community-based organizations. You have donors that are feeding into this. You have host states and their ministries that are receiving this. You have the affected population that are receiving this from all of this work. And you have the ICRC that is collaborating parallel, and then all these other inputs. So, and you can see how things are kind of thought to flow from the donors to these coordinating agencies like the UN, ICRC, NGOs, and then to eventually to the affected populations. So I want to, and this is the kind of like traditional view, but I think it's important to look at this a different way. And what I'd like is to zoom out of this, where this is in the center, and instead pull back. And now taking this affected communities and putting them at the center of it, and how we can look at the humanitarian system differently. And I encourage everybody to do this in their work and as they're thinking of who do they partner with and what organizations do they work with. So really, we take that traditional system up on the top left, and it's just one small input into the affected community. And really, when you center it from the perspective of an affected population, where are things in support coming from? And in global health and humanitarian response, it's coming from people in the community, local organizations, businesses, diaspora, governments. It's coming from non-OECD donors. When I showed that donor slide before, that was all USAID, DFID, ECHO, JICO, all of these OECD countries or G7 countries. And we tend to focus on that, but there's really so much more out there. Faith-based organizations, and then the reality of political parties and militaries and the informal militaries or armed groups. These things are all feeding to any global health or humanitarian response. And it's important to have a broad perspective of who you work with. You can zoom out even further and taking that, and this brings us into the biggest picture of the alphabet soup of the humanitarian and global health system. And this is called the nexus, or they call it different things, but the HDP nexus, the humanitarian development peace nexus. And this takes that whole response with the affected communities at the center, and feeding into this humanitarian response is the development system. These are all of the other development actors, long-term actors. And then the peace system, the different UN missions that are focusing on long-term stability. One criticism of humanitarian aid is that you're not fixing a problem, you're just responding to it. And these peace actors work to try to fix the long-term problems. And then the humanitarian actors. So when you think about global EM, we interact with all of these, every single person on this slide, and look at your own programming, what you're doing, and how you can kind of interact with more of them. And if you're new to the field, this is a whole long list of places to get involved and people to partnership with. All right, the last thing I'm going to talk about is WHO and spend a little time going in depth into the WHO. So WHO is one of the UN agencies, and it's that obviously leads health response. And since 2015 has become really increasingly and significantly involved in emergency care. Prior to that, it was mainly trauma care oriented, but which had some gaps. But it was in 2015 when they created the emergency care program, and that was led by an ER doctor, Dr. Terry Reynolds, who built this and really built this incredible system, and that has, I think, benefited people around the world, patients, and increased access to emergency care, and also been a benefit to people working in this space because it gives us a place to anchor to and a trusted partner to work with. This is the emergency care system framework that was developed by the team there, and I encourage you to familiarize yourself with this, and as you're building responses to work within this. You can see it's divided into 3 general pillars: scene care, transport care, and facility care. And then each one of these things, everything on this diagram, feeds into different levels of work. I'll speak about some of those levels of work very briefly. Basic emergency care course was one of the first projects that was led by Terry out of that group at WHO. And the whole goal of this was to provide simple, timely emergency care to anybody in the world. So recognizing that emergencies happen everywhere and that people need emergency care everywhere, well, how can people be equipped and trained to be able to respond to these emergencies without large investments in financial or human resources or material resources? So the BEC is now online and in multiple languages, and you can Google it, download it for free. It's open access and to be implemented around the world. And this is just, a great picture of Terry and Lee Wallace, who now leads the emergency care program now that Terry has been promoted, really rolling this out at an ISEM conference, the IFEM conference I was talking about earlier, several years ago in Mexico City when this was all launched. And I think really was a paradigm shift for global emergency medicine. They create a bunch of other tools that are all open access and really well vetted that I highly recommend people incorporate into their work. This is the interagency triage tool, which is jointly developed by WHO, ICRC, and Doctors Without Borders. There's for adult and peds, trauma care and medical care checklists. These are all meant to be simple tools that can provide improvement in the quality of emergency care for anywhere in the world. Probably most importantly are the World Health Assembly resolutions that this group has pushed through, that anybody working in global emergency medicine should be familiar with. There are several that predate this, but a really major one was in 2019, was this emergency care systems for universal health care. And this really, as universal health care was really being well defined as a human right around the world, this resolution clearly established emergency care as part of that, and that all people have really a human right to timely access to high quality emergency care, no matter where they are in the world or who they are, which is something that we all believe in, but a really important statement. And I encourage you to read this resolution. It's freely available in completion. So it's a great resource and well referenced. Then this past year in 2023 was, so the World Health Assembly, just to back up, happens every year in May in Geneva. And this is where all the member states of the UN come together and create the work plan for the WHO essentially every year. So this is where the decisions and the mandates are made. So this, you can imagine what it takes for 193 member states to agree on something. It takes a lot. There's a team that put a tremendous amount of work on this, led by Terry and her group, and now Lee and others who I know gave a prior presentation to this group. So this resolution is the ECO resolution, you'll hear it called, the Emergency, Critical, and Operative Care. And there's a huge media push by WHO and now the ACAN network, Acute Care Action Network, that's coming out, that's really advancing the strengthening and expansion of emergency care around the world at a rate that has never been seen before. So really important to be aware of this and get involved. This is the website that I recommend that you go to learn more about this. Again, if you're working in the field of global emergency medicine, you should be working with this group. You should be using their resources, or at a minimum, you need to be aware of them. This website is just excellent. They've done a great job with it. It has all of those resources that I showed and many more. You can download them. They're all freely available. And they just recently published this emergency care toolkit, which you can download, which is a nice summary pocket guide. And there's many, so many more things than I can even count in the pipeline. A great way to get involved and to use really well-vetted resources. Another great group, if you're working in global emergency medicine and humanitarian space in particular, is the Sphere Project. So the Sphere Handbook brought together all these different NGOs, ICRC, governments, and UN agencies to create minimum standards for humanitarian response. This is their website right here, and they have a Sphere Handbook. The most recent edition is 2018. It's being revised right now, and you can download this for free. By the way, everything that I'm sharing here, these are all open access free things, and nothing should be behind a paywall, and that's why I'm choosing to share these things. And they're all, at least in my opinion, pretty well validated and considered consensus gold standards. So if you're doing humanitarian response, get involved with the Sphere Project, and learn about it. They have a great website, ways to get involved and to learn more about minimum standards. Funding. We're not going to go in depth into how to get funding in global health, but obviously this work doesn't happen unless somebody pays for it. Volunteering is great and a good way to start, but it's not sustainable in the long term. And if you're going to have a professional career in global emergency medicine, you need to become funded, or you need to find a way to get your work supported, or you need to work directly for an agency or an NGO or somebody who's supporting your time. And that's my advice to anybody out here who's more junior, because I know myself, I came and I did a global EM fellowship after my residency, and I was really motivated and hungry, and I got out there my first few years as faculty after fellowship, and I was working a full FTE and working a ton of clinical shifts, and I was traveling constantly, doing a ton of work. The work was getting paid for, but my time was not. And I would come back routinely to Boston and then work 10 or 15 or more shifts in a row to make up for my time. That's okay for a little while when you're younger, but I will tell you that it will eventually lead to burnout and not sustainability. And it's the number one reason that good people leave this field. That really great people over the years that I've seen who had a promising career in global emergency medicine, they eventually got burnt out, and it was from a lack of funding or time support. And they moved on to other specialties in emergency medicine and are doing great things elsewhere, which is important. But there's a lot of great things that need to be done in our field of global EM. So I recommend learning about these funders. These are some of the biggest ones that are out there: USAID, the Fogarty Program, CDC, Clinton Global Initiative, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. There's many others. Look inward. You're probably not just going to go and get, a USAID or a Clinton grant or a Gates grant initially. Start small. Look in your institution, what funding opportunities, what seed grants are there in your department, in your hospital, in your university, affiliated medical school, and then grow from there. What things are available from ACEP and SAEM, EMF grants. These all publish every year, and they have increasingly available global EM-oriented grants. So get involved, build your grant portfolio, get funded, and it's an important part of this work that I think people don't talk enough about. Again, this isn't a talk to really go into depth about funding, but it's a really important thing to be aware of. And then publishing. Don't forget to publish your work. It's important to get it out there. Share best practices and build the evidence base. Because when anybody, not me or you or anybody, is advocating for the need for emergency care in the world and why emergency care should be a human right and why there should be access to it, we need to demonstrate the value of emergency care. And you do that through publishing. You show the impact of these programs, the cost effectiveness of emergency care, and how you can literally save countless lives through really small interventions in emergency care. And it's one of the most cost effective, developing emergency care is one of the most cost effective initiatives in all of global health, in my opinion. It's the amount of lives that can be saved with basic emergency care are just massive. So make sure you get your work out there. If you're not sure where to start, Gemlers is a great starting place. That's where I started. And they're a group of people that come together, about 40 people, and they review all the literature every year and then publish an annual paper in academic EM. I think they're either currently doing or just finished their call for applications right now. They do it every summer. But this is a great way to get it to network and learn the landscape of publishing and build your confidence of publishing. It did for me. These are just some of the journals that are very friendly to global EM. Obviously, the 2 or 3 big ones are BMJ Global Health, Lancet Global Health, and Bulletin of WHO. These also have really high standards and are hard to get into. But other ones that are very friendly to global EM and to our work are Disaster Medicine, Public Health Preparedness, Pre-Hospital Disaster Med, Journal of Global Health, and Annals of Global Health are 2 open access journals that do require an open access fee, but they are very friendly to global health and to global EM, and then many others that I listed here. And now even the EM textbooks like Rosen's are starting to recognize global EM as a specialty, and the new edition actually has 2 chapters, one on global emergency medicine and one on humanitarian response. So, which I think is important for recognition in our field. So when all of you have opportunities to write a chapter, to publish something, please do it, because all of this collectively is what helps us advance the field and make it real. And in the end, ensure that our patients and people that we don't know, just people everywhere, humans in the world, have access to emergency care, which is so important and something that I know even myself takes for granted here in Boston, that we have a functioning emergency care system. And it's our job to help support that for everybody in the world. So that's it. This is summary. So hopefully this went you through the whole alphabet soup, starting local, going global, talking about funding, other partnerships, how they interact with each other, and give you a bit of the landscape. If you're new to this, it's probably completely overwhelming, and that's fine. Save this and use it as a reference sheet. Use it as your cheat sheet as you encounter these organizations, because you will. If you're out there doing global health work or humanitarian work, you're going to encounter all of these players. So understand their agendas and how to work with them. Use the emergency care toolkit from WHO. That website that just got launched is just an unbelievable resource of high quality material. It's open access. It's designed for you to get it out there. So don't reinvent the wheel. Go and use and adapt this high quality material. If you have suggestions, if I missed something, if you think something's wrong, email me. I want to know about it, because I use this for our residents and for other things at ASEP and SAM, and I want to keep it as up to date as possible. Please feel free to share this, and my email is here. And thank you again for listening to me and for inviting me, Michelle. And I'll stop and see if there's any questions. And I'll look in the chat too.
Thank you.
And
I'm one of
yeah,
the global EM fellows at GW with Kay Douglas. I just started, so I'm sort of getting my MPH and doing some field work and sort of learning about all this, but this was really helpful. I really appreciate it. I think Michelle had to pop off, but
yeah, no, my pleasure. And tell Uche that I say hello. I think
oh yeah, I
she
will.
was my fellow. She graduated, I guess, now over a year ago, and I know she's down at GW now.
Yeah, she's amazing. She's doing great work.
Please tell her I say hi. Yeah, she is completely amazing. So we miss her a ton.
I will.
And tell Kate, of course, that I say hello too, who's been a mentor to me and truly incredible. And like I said, and this is a good example. This is a great example, actually. It's a small world. And I tell people, as we're in the midst of fellowship application season right now, these fellowships are all small, right? There's only 1 or 2 people each year that are taken. And I tell everybody, like, it doesn't really matter where you do fellowship. It matters who you meet along the way, because where everybody is, it changes. Everybody's in a different institution every few years and moving around, but the people are the same and the work is the same. So I tell people, like, I'm not loyal to an institution. I'm loyal to the work, and I'm loyal to the people that benefit from the work and meeting, and loyal to my network. So I recommend that for everybody as you go through these journeys. Like, just meet as many people as you can, connect with everybody, and it's all about the network.
I had a question just about the Global Emergency Medicine Lit Review and like sort of how to get involved in that, just because that's something that I'm interested in. It's just getting more comfortable with like reviewing and publishing and that kind of thing.
Yes. So they had their call for applications recently, and actually, this is another. You remind me, a great way to be in a loop as a fellow for stuff is there's two important things listservs to be on. The first is if you're an SAM member to join GMA, the number one reason is you'll be added to the GMA email listserv, which is where people post all these random opportunities. And like when I have an opportunity and I need people to deploy somewhere, I post it on GMA's listserv. And so make sure you join that. And like the Gemler, that's how they announce it. Similarly, ASAP International section has its own listserv. So I
Okay.
highly recommend getting on both of those listservs. And then for Gemler specifically, oh, thank you, Brittany. All right. I was just going to say, so there's the link. They have a web page. If they have closed it already, you can still email Austin Lee
Yeah.
and should
Even if it's next year, just to like sort of get an idea.
yeah, highly recommend it. I started it my last year of residency, and last year I finally resigned after doing it for 10 years. But it was an incredible experience, and I learned so much, and I met so many people. So I really recommend it to everybody.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
And Brittany put the website right there.
Yeah, thank you, Brittany.
And yeah, and then as Michelle said, yeah, AFChem, highly recommend AFChem, and then these other ones. It gets tough because there's like a conference every month, and most fellowships I know don't pay for you to go to the conferences, so you get like a little bit of CME and that's it. But I tell my fellows like pick at least one of them and go because it's great networking and people want to meet you. You're the next generation. So any of these, ISM, AFChem, CUGH, these are all worthwhile. All right. Any other questions? Or I guess, this is now I'm supposed to disappear so that you guys can talk amongst yourselves.
Thank you so much.